All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn of 2022. Very exciting. I'm Allison Marchioni. I'm the Programs Director at the Upper Valley Land Trust. Thank you for attending today. We have a really exciting and interesting presentation for you. Before we get started, I do want to let everyone know that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the UVLT YouTube channel after it's over. So for today, I'm excited to welcome you to this Meadow Management for Ground Nesting Birds presentations, or Bobolinks and beyond. And today we have Kevin Tolan, a staff biologist from the Vermont Center for Ecostudies, joining us. At the Vermont Center for Ecostudies, Kevin primarily focuses on vernal pools and birds. His grassland bird conservation work involves meeting with landowners and managers to reach a balance between the needs of people and the needs of birds. Last year, he coordinated a statewide survey for the eastern meadowlark across the state and will be spearheading a monitoring effort this upcoming spring. So welcome, Kevin. Yes. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started here. I'm going to ask everyone to stay on mute for the presentation so we don't have any disruptive noise or feedback. And if you have questions, which I hope you will, please type them into the chat box. And when the presentation is over, I'll go through the questions and ask them to Kevin. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting. Before we start, I'd like to give a brief land acknowledgement to the original land managers of the landscape. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Abenaki people on which we are organizing, learning, and working today. The Abenaki are the traditional stewards of these lands and continue to care for them. We remember the violence they have endured at the hands of colonialism and white supremacy, which persists to this day. We pay respects to the elders past and present and give thanks for the opportunity to share in this place and protect it. Thanks. I just think that's really important to always make sure we keep that in mind, especially a subject like this, such as land management. Thanks so much for inviting me to talk. I live in Norwich, so this is a area, the Upper Valley, that is near and dear to my heart. I've birded at a lot of the sites that have grassland birds and a lot of the UVLT sites. So really happy to be here. I'm going to dive right into it. I have a lot to cover. Feel free to ask questions and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. So when we think about grassland birds, most people think about the birds out in the Midwest in like the, little house in the prairie, expansive, golden grain, massive fields, but they're really much more expansive. They're everything from shrubby California grasslands to those head high grains. And they're sustained by natural processes, primarily fire and water availability. Where there's more water, there's generally going to be less fire and you're going to find taller grass. So the Chihuahuan Desert in Mexico and the Southwest is a grassland, it's a shrubland. There's very little water, there's more fire, and the grass is much shorter. So that's not really going to be habitat for a lot of the bobolinks and stuff that we're talking about up here. And a lot of people also ask, why am I concerned with grassland birds in the Northeast if their native, quote unquote, native area is the Midwest? And I'm going to get to that in a little while, but a big part of it is because a lot of their habitat in their native range has been lost. The only section of this tall grass prairie, this green area that's remaining as of 2001, so it's even less now, is this little green section. And all that's remaining of the short grass prairie is this little orange section. To help put in context what kind of landscape or I guess vegetation Vermont mostly has, it's kind of right in this area. It's this kind of right at the same latitude. It's a mixed grass prairie, so a little bit of short and a little bit of tall. But of course, ours is all at the time currently has been planted and is heavily managed by humans. Back in the 1800s, bobolinks and grassland birds were widespread in Vermont. It was heavily deforested, lots of sheep grazing, and that's kind of the heyday of bobolinks and meadowlarks here. That's around the time that the wolf was lost from the Northeast, or at least from New England, I guess, Vermont. Forest greatly decreased. And now recently, we're kind of reverting to that forested state, and their population has been crashing. So what has formerly been very, very widespread in Vermont and elsewhere in the Northeast has been greatly diminished. And this is seen when you're looking at the relative abundance of bobolinks. Since the so USGS does a breeding bird survey every spring. It started in 1966. It's range wide through the US and Canada, which covers all of the bobolinks range. And it's been a steady decrease since those surveys started. And if we remember, like, this isn't, an exact graph, but if they only started those surveys here, you can only imagine at their peak how many of these birds there were. And they're kind of coming right toward the end of their relative abundance. They're, greatly decreased in the past couple decades. And now they're pretty much relegated to small pockets of grassland throughout the state. And this is seen in basically every single grassland bird we have. These are the estimated annual declines of these species in Vermont. So bobolink declined 2.7% a year. Meadowlark 8.7% a year, which is a reason that it's hopefully being listed as threatened this year. I'd be extremely surprised if it doesn't go through, but at the moment it's not listed. Birds like the Henslow sparrow, which are listed as endangered in Vermont, haven't nested here. Or we haven't known them to nest here since the 1970s. The Upland Sandpiper, there's one, maybe two nesting pairs left in the state. So a lot of these birds are highly endangered, probably the most endangered species we have in Vermont. And compared to other species that may be nesting in Wentlock Wildlife Management Area or way up in Northeast Kingdom, like some of the boreal species, grassland species are pretty much always near people and are relatively easy to survey. So we have a pretty good sense of these species and the numbers. The Grasshopper Sparrow here, it's threatened, which is one step less endangered than endangered. Basically threatened means we're at risk of the species becoming endangered, and endangered means we're at risk of the species being lost from the state. So for these species, like the Upland Sandpiper is endangered, we have one, maybe two nesting pairs. Grasshopper Sparrow, maybe 20, 25 nesting pairs. And the Eastern Meadowlark, maybe 40 nesting pairs. That's about the estimate I came up with doing the survey this past year. But if it keeps going with that 8.7% decline, that's going to go down to 20 nesting pairs within a decade. So we need to act really quickly to save these species. The only species here that is increasing, the Savannah Sparrow, I wouldn't actually say it's increasing. The population estimates of it are all over the place. Some years very high, some years very low. So it's pretty much just like it's very stochastic, but it basically just averages out. There's a couple reasons for that. They can use shorter grasses than these other species and renest more readily. So even if they do have their field cut, they can renest quicker. So I think that plays a big role into why they are undergoing these massive declines. I'm going to give just a little bit of background info on meadowlarks because they are so imperiled in the state and they are hopefully getting listed. And then I'm going to focus to bobolinks for the most part. So meadowlarks were kind of right in that northeastern range. They do overwinter, increasingly so in southern New England. And last year, one did overwinter in Addison County, I believe. So they are moving northward quite a bit. They are mostly limited in their northern wintering range by the minimum or the average low temperature. So if like the average low temperature is below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, they won't overwinter there. If it's above, they will. So as the climate changes, they're slowly expanding their northward wintering range. And it is really interesting that they live year round in southern or in northern South America as well. So there's a huge range latitudinally compared to the bobolink, which is kind of covering the border of US and Canada. These are the eBird observations of the past couple of years. In New Hampshire, they're pretty much relegated to airports. They actually have more grasshopper sparrows than meadowlarks now. Because Vermont has the massive Champlain Valley, we have up here is a pretty heavy agricultural area. We have many more individuals than them. Only 4 potential sites in the in the Upper Valley. The Upper Meadows here in Charleston has been a pretty good site in the past. Stevens Road here, which is the star, that I believe is a UVLT property. It's where Tinkham Farms is. And I haven't confirmed meadowlark breeding there, but we have seen them in the early breeding season last year. And I think that if there's one place in the Upper Valley they would nest, that'd be a great spot for them. So definitely keep our eyes out there. And then in New Hampshire, right here in Charleston, I think it's at like a hang glider airport, and then up here at the Lebanon airport. So outside the Champlain Valley in Vermont, there's only like 6 nesting sites for meadowlark, which is insane. Especially they used to be so much more widespread, and now they're just disappearing off the entire landscape. Bobolinks are probably the grassland bird that most people would be familiar with. They act as a focal species for grassland conservation, because when you manage for bobolinks and you conserve for bobolinks, you manage for most other grassland species. So they kind of go hand in hand, and it helps us from having to manage separately for 10 different species that all have really similar habitat needs. They're a long distance migrant, so they breed up here and they overwinter way down here in southern South America, and all these little blue spots. So they are one of the longest migrants in this hemisphere. I think the longest shorebird, or the longest land bird migrant. So that excludes some of the shorebirds like plovers and birds like the Arctic tern, which is just ridiculous. In Vermont and New Hampshire, definitely more widespread than meadowlark. They can use smaller grasslands, so that's a big role into them being able to stay in the landscape much better. In New Hampshire, still relegated to airports at many sites, but they pop up more and more frequently, especially during migration. In Vermont, we have, sorry, I should mention, all these purple dots are Vermont. In Vermont, we do have a pretty significant bobolink population along the Connecticut. And then obviously over in Champlain Valley, up here, we also have sizable populations. Green Mountain National Forest, not a whole ton. I'm gonna just kind of go over their migration quickly. It's a really interesting route. We don't know a whole ton about, honestly. They use both magnetic and stellar cues to navigate. So they use the stars as their primary method of navigation. And research suggests they actually recognize several constellations in case one star or one constellation is blocked out by clouds. There are other waypoints that they can use. And then they have an iron ore kind of right in their nares, like right in their nostrils. And that acts as like the inclination compass. So as they get closer and further from the pole, the angle from true north to magnetic north changes. And so they use that little magnetic iron oxide, to help offset and kind of compensate for that inclination change. I'll start with wintering because that's where they are right now. These blue areas are where we put little GPS, or they're called light level geolocators. They detect the relative day to night period, and then using that, you can extrapolate approximate lat long. So using those, These blue areas are where they primarily overwinter, but by far the heaviest concentration is right down here in Paraguay and Argentina. They form mixed age and sex flocks. So all different ages, all different sexes merge together in especially rice producing regions. There was a big concern for a while that farmers down there may be killing bobolinks because they're perceived as an agricultural pest, but that's not the case. I think that was more of a, that was less of a, that was more of a guess than an observation. But they really don't, they're not considered pests down there a whole ton, especially with more education. Only about 2 to 5% of the loss is due to bobolinks, which is less than insects and fungi and other species of bird. So that's not really a huge issue for conservation. They may shoot the gun in the air to like spook the birds off rice, but they're not like actively killing or actively poisoning the birds, which is good, obviously. And the reason that they stayed so heavily in rice producing regions is because they need that rice for their molt. They undergo 2 complete molts every year, which is very rare for songbirds. And the rice just helps with that a little bit. In March, they'll start heading northward. Generally, they kind of just go beeline straight north. They'll stop here in Venezuela, Colombia, in this grassland before shooting over the Caribbean and then either going east, north, or west. We don't really know when they get here what they do. That's still an area of research. In general, you'll have the older males arrive first, then the older females, then the younger males, then the younger females. And this is all about trade-offs. If you leave earlier, you're not going to have much time to stock up on fat and nutrition. You might be hitting colder weather when you arrive at your breeding grounds, but you get there earlier, so you have prime territory selection and you can set your territory much quicker, get mates going faster, all that stuff. So that's why the adults could do that. You know, they're older, they're used to migration, they're probably gonna be a little bit stronger. Younger birds will leave later so they can be more prepared, eat more, stock up more nutrition and fat before heading across the Caribbean. They get there, the weather will probably be warmer, but it's harder for them to set up a territory. That's all just part of their breeding strategy, which I'll talk about in a second. When I said that the bobolinks had a very latitudinal distribution, this is what I meant. It's pretty much all in this narrow belt from mid-northern US to southern Canada. It's kind of unusual. For a lot of species, we have an east and a west divide. Like with meadowlarks, we have eastern meadowlarks and western meadowlarks. That's not the case for bobolinks, which is another really interesting part about how unique they are. They're the only species in their genus. They do a lot of things differently than other species. Once they get to their territories, the males start displaying very heavily, especially early in the morning, right around like between 4 and 6 a.m. they'll start up. I describe their display as wind-up toys. They fly up in the air and they do some circles while singing an R2-D2 like song, and it's just the craziest thing to hear. When they start doing courtship, they'll kind of chase each other around. You may see a couple of males chasing one female, kind of like they're playing tag. And there's a couple different breeding strategies that I mentioned. The polygynous males are generally going to be the older males in the better habitat, where they'll have several females, several mates within their range. Compare that to the bachelors, which are the younger males, where they don't have a range, they don't have a territory, so they may try and sneak in to an older male's territory to mate with one of the females there, quickly take off.
Out.
quickly take off, and then the more dominant male has the potential to be raising that younger male's offspring. So there's several different strategies they can take, and depending on the field, the habitat quality, the location, it can all change. So different fields, you can have different individuals taking on different strategies that reflects the resources available at their field. They nest on the ground, which makes them especially vulnerable to haying and improper management. Usually 5 eggs, hopefully 3 of them will make it, but can be even more. And when you're looking for evidence of nesting, just look for the adults carrying something, whether it be carrying food to the nest or carrying the offspring. They produce little fecal sacs. So it's like poop, but it's like wrapped in like a case type thing so that the adult can easily pick it up and remove it from the nest. Look for them carrying that away from the nest. Just look for them carrying stuff. If they're eating the food themselves, they're probably not going to carry it around. The only reason they carry food around is for the nestlings. Once we hit August, September, and the nests have fledged, they start staging for migration. So you'll have, say you have 5 fields in the area. Each of the bobolinks at each of those 5 fields will start flocking. And then as the fields are cut, the birds from that field will move and merge with a flock at a neighboring field. So you have all these different fields populations merging up together at the prime areas with lots of seeds and rice to help get lots of carbs going for their southward migration. And they're not limited to hay fields. So you may see them in more shrubby areas, maybe like some early successional stuff. Still not like the forest or anything, but they're not just limited to hay fields during this stage. A really interesting story I like telling from this guy, Mark Catesby, who is kind of like one of the original like European natural history guys that came over to explore and discover the New World. He didn't know that the bobolinks underwent this huge molt in their breeding grounds. So he noticed in Florida and in the southern US during northward migration, the bobolinks had males and females because you could see the difference. The males were in their breeding plumage, females weren't. When they went southward, the females were there, but there were no males in the breeding plumage. So he assumed that the males must have migrated southward at a different area or at a different time than the females. And of course, that wasn't the case. They just didn't know that they underwent this huge molt. Fall migration takes a little bit longer than spring migration. They're not in quite as a hurry to get to their wintering range as they are to their summering range. If they're not going to breed, there's just not that same incentive to get there as quick as possible. So usually they'll head south, they'll stop here for a couple weeks, and then stop in Bolivia for a couple weeks, and then most continue down to the Paraguay down here. They are the only known land bird that annually passes through the Galapagos Islands, which is really interesting. We don't know which population that is. We don't know what migratory pathway they use to get there, but we do know that they carry invasive species and avian malaria to the Galapagos, to those endemic species. So that's an interesting section of conservation concern for the Galapagos endemics. Is there's this vector species bringing avian malaria to the island. I know that VCE, my predecessor Roz, has done some work with that, and Noah, who does work in the Champlain Valley, he's a professor at University of New England. He also does work on that as well. So there's ongoing research being done with that. That's a basic overview of their life history. Really a insanely long migration for for such a little bird. It never fails to amaze me. Do you have any questions about that going forward? Anyone? Cool. Cool. So I'm talking a little bit of the habitat characteristics now. Obviously, these birds, they like grasslands, they like hay fields, but not all hay fields are created equal. Probably the biggest thing that I look at when comparing grassland habitat is just the size. We say 10-acre relative minimum, not a golden rule, but that's it's a pretty good rule of thumb. And boxy is better than funky. If you look at these two fields here, compare the interior space, obviously, though this field is smaller, it has much more area further away from the edges than here, where there's very little room that you can get away from the edges. And they really do want this interior space. This is a little thing I stole from Mass Audubon. Bobolinks, 10+ acres, and then meadowlarks, Grasshopper Sparrow, 6+ acres. So that just shows, again, why these other grassland species, such as the Upland Sandpiper, Eastern meadowlark, and Grasshopper Sparrow, potentially are declining much faster. It's just because they require a lot more space. And in Vermont, those big parcels are being broken up. Openness and edge is another huge thing they look for, both distance to edge, as I mentioned, which is why they like those really boxy shapes, as well as type of edge, because that affects the openness. If you think about standing in a 10-acre field versus a 200-acre field, if you have a bunch of trees on the horizon, the angle from the ground to where you can see the top of the trees is going to be much greater in a small field where they're only 100 feet away from you versus a large field if they're 1,000 feet from you. It's all perspective. And so you're a bobolink and you want to have a really wide open area. You want to have an edge that's not very intrusive. So instead of a bunch of huge pines, maybe a road, because that doesn't interrupt that openness. It doesn't change that. You can't see the edge, basically. It just looks like it goes on for further. And this is a reason that sometimes these birds prefer higher elevation, or at least fields with a slight hill that offer a further view shed. Because if you're in this field on Lake Champlain and you're up on this hill, your view shed is massive compared if you were down in this smaller, or this is about the same size field, but this lower field, your view shed would just be to these trees. And yeah, like 40% of nests occurred within the innermost 9% of habitat in study fields. And that habitat was all over 100 meters away from the edges. So lots of interior space and good openness is what these birds are really looking for. And using GIS and LiDAR, you can do that remotely. So this is Cossingham Farm in Norwich. It's a great bobolink field. This is just a satellite image, like from Google Sat. This is LiDAR. So this is from the state. Basically, they fly over with a drone or a plane and they bounce kind of like echolocation radar off the ground. And depending on the return, they can assess the 3D ness of the field. So you see these trees are higher elevation than this lowland here, and you can even see the top of the roof here is higher elevation. So using that, you can plug it into computer, and for each point, it will generate a view shed and then average it. So on the edges here, where that view shed to the edge is much smaller, that's not going to be great habitat. That's not really that usable. But as you get to the middle, and this is on a slight hill, so the view shed this way is very big. It's much more open than this area over here because it's a smaller field and it's close to the edges. So this is just a really interesting way of looking kind of at a field's suitability in more of a 3D way than just a 2D way based on the size. And this is being used more and more in development projects for either development or solar projects. It's just much easier than getting on ground and doing in-person manual openness surveys, which are very time intensive. And then part of the reasons why the Champlain Valley is the hotbed for grassland birds is because it's a very open landscape. In this landscape, there's lots of openness. We might see this one field here as 20 acres, but a bird might see like this is 20, say this is 60. To them, this might be a 80-acre field. And then they might throw this little block on, and this is a 100-acre field, compared to this where it's capped at being 25 acres max. Additionally, if you're a bird in this field and it gets cut, it's very easy to migrate to this one or to a neighboring field. If you're in this field and it gets cut, you have nowhere to go and you don't have any fields to supply birds to it. So a site like this, I would not expect to have many bobolinks, if any at all, whereas this would be pretty much a prime landscape for bobolinks or grassland birds in general. I'm just checking the chat real quick. Yes, it is. Costingham Farms, UVLT. Cool. Now I'm going to touch on some threats, and then I'm going to go into management. Then some stuff about like future, like the future, what the future looks like, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions, discussion. Awesome. So I blocked out most of this, so it's not overwhelming. But these are the highest threats to bobolinks currently. In their non-breeding habitat, their main threat is changes in precipitation and loss of wet grasslands, which is pretty much partially a byproduct of climate change. In breeding habitat, grazing pressure too high is a high threat. More frequent haying and mowing is a high threat, and habitat conversion is a very high threat. Also notice extreme weather and phenology mismatch is a high threat, which kind of goes right hand in hand with this climate change, changes of precipitation, loss of wet habitat. So I'm going to kind of focus on these few things. I have the entire chart at the end if you want to see what the other threats considered are. So habitat conversion is a huge one. As we saw, it was the very high threat in the breeding habitat, the highest threat in the breeding habitat. That's because occasionally, especially now, there is a financial incentive to transition from hay to crops such as soybean or corn or other crops. They're just more financially viable. Right now, there's a bit of a dairy crisis in the state, which I'll talk about in a second. But for a lot of people, if you have 100 acres of grass and you're not making money from it, you can easily transition it to something much more profitable. And if it's transitioned away from grass, the odds of it getting reseeded with grass are extremely small. Of course, subdivision is a huge issue for any habitat, but especially in Vermont, when you have a beautiful piece of land like this on the Champlain Valley, you could easily put up a subdivision here, break this habitat up. Again, it's never going to be a field again. It's never going to be a large field again. Once these fields are lost, they're lost basically forever. And then now more and more solar is becoming an issue. Obviously, I am not anti-solar, but there is a very real possibility that more solar projects will start reducing the available grassland habitat. It's very easy to put solar panels in a field when you don't have to clear down trees. There are now more state directives for solar and other development, such as you have to provide a 1 to 2 mitigation. So basically, if you take 4 acres and turn it into solar panels, you have to protect 8 acres of grassland, which is great. I'm really happy about that. It's not the best thing, I think, but it's very good. Like there are some small issues that I think could be exploited, But I think going forward, as we can build on that program or on that regulation, and I think that will only get more and more strengthened, the better. When I mentioned dairy crisis, this is what I mean. This is from yesterday, or 3-4 days ago, 6 days ago, they all blend together. Consumers asked to support Northeast organic dairy industry. These two companies, Horizon and Maple, Horizon Organic Maple Hill, have basically canceled all contracts with the organic farmers in Northeast, which includes 28 Vermont farms. And if you look at these graphs, the numbers have only been going downhill for years. This only starts in 2010, but the decline started way in front of that. And a big reason that is because there's been a sustained low price of dairy. That's one of the reasons, sustained low price of dairy products. There's also an aging farming population. So as farmers age out, there may not be anyone to purchase their land and care for it, which can lead to field abandonment. Or they'll sell it to a developer or someone else, or they'll sell it to one of the increasing industrial size farms, the farms with like more than 700 cattle, and it becomes more of an industrialized company production than it is now. And like just the acreage of grazed land in Vermont has also undergone massive decline. This Claro et al. Article that I took these graphs from is the 10-year strategic plan for Vermont's agriculture. Lots of really cool stuff in there. I think it's definitely worth a glance. Even if just for the dairy section, dairy is so important to Vermont that I really learned a lot from it. And it's available for free on the website. Just Google it. I'm sure you can find it, or I can email it to you. I mentioned field abandonment being a big issue when farms close or stop managing their lands. That's because once you stop haying, you start getting these weeds and woody species invading. If that happens too much, it's just not going to be grassland habitat anymore. It's going to start becoming more of a shrubland habitat, which is great for some species. There are a lot of shrubland species, but after a couple of years of that, and it starts looking like this here, that's not really grassland bird habitat anymore. And it's a cycle. Different plants will affect the soil differently. In this example, they become more acidic. Frost starts bringing rocks to the surface, which might prevent them from being hayed effectively or easily down in the future. And it just keeps going. So once a field has stopped being actively managed, there's a ticking time limit before it's no longer usable, which is one of the difficulties with management. Is you can't just leave a field and just let it go like you could with a forest. You got to actively cut the hay. Invasive plants becoming more and more an issue in many environments in Vermont. In the hay fields, I just mentioned these two here, yellow rattle and wild Chervil. These are prevalent in many fields because people, you'll have one farmer that may cut many people's fields. And if one field has it and the seeds get on the cutting equipment, it's just going to spread it to every other field. So the best way to get rid of these is cut them before they flower, before they can go to seed, which is the antithesis of grassland bird conservation. If you get these invasive plants, you want to be cutting 3-4 times a year to keep them from seeding. Do that for 3-ish years until the seeds in the ground are no longer viable. And then you can start releasing the vegetation. And hopefully by then, any of the seed bank seeds just won't grow. Also, if you are using machinery shared between fields, especially if one of them has invasives or is known to have invasives, try and hose it off, clean it off as best you can. It's much easier said than done to hose off a big piece of farm equipment in the middle of a field. It's not like you have a hose with you all the time, but just definitely something to keep an eye out. And if you do notice something coming in, such as you see a wild chervil and you see 4 stalks, you want to get out and you can just take scissors, cut them down, and then that hopefully will nip it in the bud before they start to spread. Once they start to spread, that's when it becomes a much bigger issue. Yellow rattle usually doesn't spread too well by the air. That's mostly spread by equipment. So you might see it popping up where the farm equipment gets parked. If that's the case, just try and cut the section where it's present. Try and keep that down, keep that from seeding, and hopefully there'll be other sections of the field which aren't invaded yet that you can still just let grow. The predicted change in precipitation, especially in non-breeding areas, could be a huge issue. This section corresponds to here, this one to here. Basically up here, it's gonna get a lot drier. Here, it's predicted to get a lot wetter. We don't really know how that's gonna affect these birds. If it's drier and hotter, could be more fires. The drought could reduce prey and seeds, so less food. It may cause more fields to be cultivated for agricultural, for like produce, if there's a food crisis because of the drought. And if this gets too wet, that could be good. It could be more primary productivity, so better quality food, so the birds have a better body condition, so they can migrate better. Or it could be more rain, so more extreme weather events, which would cause a loss of food and worse body conditions and later arrival to breeding. So we don't know what to do, but we know when things are changing like this, it's not great, especially for a bird like this that travels across the equator. If things are changing down in their wintering grounds, they have no idea what's changing in their breeding grounds. And they use seasonal cues to go. So if they depart their wintering ground too early or too late without knowing what's going on up north, they could get there and just the breeding timeline just doesn't work out. They get there too early and it's too cold for them, or they get there too late and there's not enough time to breed. So that has the potential to be a huge issue down the road when considering the full life cycle management for the species. It's just those species with these long, they can't know what's going on the other side of it. How could they know what's going on the other side of the planet, right? So as climate change is affecting the grasslands, both here and down the south, we don't know the effect, could be bad. Intensive haying, also kind of like one of the major things we talk about with grassland birds. Basically, if you're a dairy farmer, you need to cut more frequently to get the best nutrient quality. See in this graph, after 28 days, it's relative feed value of 160. In a couple of weeks, it's down pretty significantly. So that's one of the reasons why farmers have been cutting heavier and heavier, is to get that better quality hay for their dairy cattle. But of course, the bobolinks don't have enough time to breed. Management for this, I'm now kind of combating that, is bird-friendly haying, which is not possible for a lot of people, especially if you have a working farm and you rely on this high-quality hay for the income. And that's something I want to make sure people know is like, grassland conservation is it's not demonizing farmers for cutting heavily. It's trying to find opportunities where you don't have to cut heavily. And so if you have the option to be able to decide when you cut, August 1st is kind of the golden standard. This is the cumulative nests bred, or cumulative nests fledged. By August 1st, almost 100% of nests have fledged. Compared to if you cut in early July, you're looking at like a 50% fledge rate in the Champlain Valley. If you're outside the Champlain Valley, that could be even lower because the delayed time it takes to get started. If you do need to get 2 cuts in, this is again a primarily Champlain Valley thing. But if you cut before June 1st, wait 65 days before a second cut, which puts you kind of in early mid-August, that's good. It's not the best, but it's okay. Some mowing strategies, just if you do have to mow, to minimize fatalities, because it could be, if you're mowing in July, a bird could be one day away from having flight muscles strong enough to dodge your machine, or strong enough to fly to another field. So anything you can do to reduce mortality helps, such as like this, like instead of going outward in and corralling all birds in the middle for one final swoop, go outward, go inwards out, and that'll kind of chase them to the edges away from the machine. Kind of same thing here. You're cutting most of the field, you're chasing them toward a refuge. Here you're avoiding the grassy knoll where they may be preferring to breed because of that openness I mentioned, or just cut the outside of the edge, leave the interior, again, the interior where the highest nesting densities are. 13 minutes. I'm going to start going a little bit quicker. Not all, as I mentioned, not all grasslands are created equal for bobolinks. I wouldn't even bother suggesting someone delay this. Yeah, this might have some bobolinks in it. This might have a couple Savannah sparrows, but that's a maybe compared to this big round section, which with all its interior space. So someone had the option to only cut half or to only delay half their fields. Maybe they could cut this side and some of this if they needed to. Kind of prioritizing the best habitat to be delayed. And that can also be done with rotational grazing. Say this is obviously a very simplistic diagram, but say this is the best habitat. Could I graze this in early June and then rotate them through these other three? And then by the time you get back to this paddock, the birds will be mostly fledged. So you're avoiding the paddock with livestock during that prime breeding time. And yes, birds can thrive, can live with livestock, especially in lower densities. Like the bobolinks, they evolved with bison on the landscape, right? So they're used to having big ungulates. The main difference is bison might stick around for one day and then take off, whereas cows in a paddock might just be standing in the same spot for, and just however long the rotation is, which just increases that trampling. So we say usually 50 cattle days per hectare is like a grazing density that we kind of go for. It just basically means one cattle, say like 50 cattle days per hectare, one cow for 50 days per hectare, or 2 cows for 25 days per hectare, or 10 cows for 5 days per hectare. Not possible for everyone, again, but that's just a guideline. And when we are creating these paddocks, we say to try and keep them at least 70 by 70 meters, which is about half a hectare. That allows for renesting, for females to renest in or near the paddock that's being prioritized. If their paddocks are too small, the bird would just fly to another paddock probably, and it just wouldn't work as well. This is something that I would definitely reference. I tell people to talk to Extension about this. If you're gonna reseed or you have the option of seeding land, there's 2 options of grasses you can go for: cool season or warm season. Cool season is what we mostly have in Vermont, and it appears to have the highest bobolink densities, but it's also a very high input, like lots of fertilizers, and it's a high effort product. Compared to warm season grass, which is more native to kind of like the mid-Atlantic, kind of like that area west, is more drought tolerant and has low input but high output. So as you can imagine, if the climate continues to change the way it is and things start getting drier and warmer, these cool season grasses aren't gonna appeal as much as a drought tolerant grass would. which isn't great if the bobolinks like the cool season grasses more. This is something that I would totally push people to extension to talk about more. Based on your field, your location, your soil type, I'm sure whatever, extension will have ideas about the best type of grass to plant. This is just kind of like a cover all for just grasses. But of course, the cost to reseed a field is very high. It can be very high. So that's a consideration. Cool. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the future and why I want to keep bobolinks in Vermont so badly. This is a great map. It shows conservation opportunities for bobolinks. It takes into consideration like their bobolink relative abundance, the area of grass, like in one state relative to other states, in one county relative to other counties, future climate, sustainability, all this stuff. And Northeast is looking pretty darn good for conservation for bobolinks compared to much of their native range that is not looking good for bobolinks. We have like up here, the prairie pothole region, here kind of like the breadbasket, Erie region, and then northern Vermont, I guess all of Vermont, honestly, all New Hampshire, most of Maine. When we zoom in on New Hampshire, these are like the cream of the crop. These are like the best, highest potential for conservation. That doesn't mean that the other ones are worthless. This is still very high conservation value. And a big part of that is the climate resiliency. This is from Audubon, National Audubon. They've done some incredible climate projections. And this map on the left shows the projected imminent range change of bobolinks. Basically, all this red area will be lost. That's the projection. If it goes up 1.5 degrees Celsius, I think it's by 2050, which is going to happen the way things are looking. All this blue space will be gained. So Vermont is in that area where we're going to be maintaining habitat. So will Maine, so will the prairie potholes. What's going to be losing it is all this region. And if things get plus 3 degrees centigrade by 2080, which is kind of like the worst case scenario that people have been looking at, it's entirely possible that they'll almost entirely be lost. That they'll be almost entirely lost from the U.S. Except here in northern Maine and potentially a little bit into this Vermont area. If things only change by 2 degrees, that just means there's going to be even more birds down in Vermont still. So this is a huge area of their native range that's being lost, or that is going to be lost within my lifetime. And so if I can keep them in Vermont, and we can keep them in Vermont, and the state can keep them here, and people team up and really care about birds like I know people in Vermont do, there's no reason why we can't create a great grassland refuge for these birds when they inevitably start losing much of their native range. And that's kind of my main selling point for people when they ask me, why should I conserve grassland birds? Grassland birds aren't native to Vermont. Vermont, before European settlement, it was very forested. Yeah, it was. But this isn't, this is the reality of climate change. And we need to be proactive. And we can't only be worrying about this when we're on the verge of losing them, which historically is what happens with Vermont's grassland birds. If we didn't get the eastern meadowlark listed, there's no reason that it couldn't be down to 2 nesting pairs soon, like the Upland Sandpiper is. Something else I think was just really interesting looking at these maps is that they project habitat potentially being gained up here in Alaska under both circumstances. I think that that's really interesting. It makes sense, climate-wise and habitat-wise, it'd probably be a great fit, but it really makes me wonder how the birds would get there. Like, it definitely makes sense to me that some could get blown off course and end up there and potentially establish an Alaskan population. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to look for going forward, both here up in Alaska and in Vermont, where we're going to start seeing more and more climate refuges moving in, such as like probably hooded warbler, war-mating warbler. We'll start seeing these species moving in more and more. So it's going to be a really interesting time for climate studies and range studies. I want to touch on some funding opportunities. For the most part, these are limited to larger grasslands, minimum of 20 acres. EQIP and CSP, these two on the left, are both through NRCS. EQIP has upped their offer this year to $160 an acre if you enroll with like your 20 acre minimum, 20 good acres, like blocky, good habitat. I'm not 100% sure what the per acre cost is for CSP, but it's a $1,500 minimum per year. 3-year max for EQIP, 5-year max for CSP. Bobolink project is through Mass Audubon, I think New Hampshire Audubon and Vermont Audubon maybe. That is a private thing where private donors, they donate money to it, and then landowners can submit bids of the amount of money they can take, the least amount of money they can take to delay their field. And then the Bobolink project basically weighs those bids together. So a bit of a different selection process than EQIP. I do believe that Bobolink project is a 3-year max as well. And then conservation commissions, you know, they have some. Vermont's very lucky with the conservation commissions we have. Both the AVCC is incredible, and so many towns have one, and I've had the pleasure of working with many of them. And I'll give one example of how I've done that with Grassland Birds. During the last year when we were doing our Eastern Meadowlark survey, one of our volunteers found a meadowlark site in Richford that wasn't known about. Richford is very agricultural. I assume there are meadowlark there, but it's also it's a very heavily industrialized agricultural area. There's one or two very big farmers there that hay very heavily. And so we touched base. We're like, they're like, Kevin, like, what's like the going rate for delay mowing, and like, would this be worth saving, or what other habitat in the area can be saved? So like, I give them some technical advice. The Conservation Commission raised a couple $100, and within a couple of weeks of discovering this meadowlark site, which would have been mowed, we were able to delay mow it thanks to the fundraising of the commission. So literally anyone can do this. You know, I'm here to help people who want to conserve their grassland birds. And so if you're like, oh, like my neighbor has grasslands and he's cutting, they'll give them my email. Maybe I'll be able to find a way to strike a compromise with them. Or if you have one fantastic grassland site in your town that everyone loves, and it's sold to a farmer that might start haying it more often, potentially think about starting up a delay mowing fund. You know, especially in agricultural land, for agriculture, like money talks, because this is people's livelihoods. And if their only option is cutting it or not making a livelihood, they're going to have to cut it. But I'm sure they would be just as fine taking a subsidy to delay it than, like, I doubt that there are many farmers that go out with the intention of killing as many bobolinks as possible. You know, I think that farmers, from my experience, have been very open to conservation and finding ways to integrate that into their farm life. That's just a quick plug for myself. Grassland Ambassadors. I meet with farmers to try and find compromises between human needs and bird needs. I go all over the state. Feel free to give people my email. I'll give that to you in a second. More than happy to Zoom or call with you or visit your land if you have some good habitat this year. We also have these really awesome signs, which we have at some UVLT properties. Hopefully we can get them out at any others that have grassland birds. And we basically get new stickers made up every year. And so we can keep in touch and I'm trying to build like a community of grassland ambassadors who have knowledge on management and can be a voice for the birds. VCE is really into eBird. I'm a very big eBirder. I use eBird extensively. That's what I use for my Eastern Meadowlark survey. So if you go to a field and you see a bobolink or a meadowlark, consider letting me know or throwing it on eBird. It's really simple to use. It's really fun. It's a great community. And it just gets the data usable by anyone that needs to use it. It's open source. So whether it be me or Vermont Audubon or Massachusetts Audubon or UVM, it's open to everyone. So there's my Grasslands email, grasslands@vtecostudies.org. We also have a nesting calendar that kind of gives an idea of the general nesting timeline for bobolinks. I'll get it updated this year for 2022. We also have these great pamphlets that I'm happy to hand out or mail people or give people to hand out, or leave in their church or their local library or anything. I have a ton of these. Just go over the general info on grassland conservation, and then our priority species, just for people that may not be familiar with some of these species, kind of just talks a little bit about how to identify them and their song. Finally, though, if you want to follow us on anything or learn more about volunteering or get our e-news, we do like monthly e-news and field notes for seasonal stuff. We'd love to have you get involved with VC in any capacity you can. Yeah, that's basically all I have. I have a couple other slides just for reference, but that's it. That's what I got.
That's great. Thank you, Kevin. There were a couple questions in the chat, and then if people have other questions, either chat them in or ask them. There were some questions about plants, wild chervil, if there's another name for it, and someone pointing out that bedstraw is also an invasive that overwhelms hay.
Yeah. Wild chervil. There's also Queen Anne's lace, which is wild parsnip. They're very similar looking, but they're different species. But I think a lot of times they kind of get grouped into ones because they look so similar. On our website, I do have, I'm working on getting more up there, but I do have some just kind of basic info on different species, best time to, like where they're native to, best time to cut, stuff like that. So I can link that too.
Yeah, we've got another question here about, are towns and states likely to change roadside mowing practices in keeping with not spreading invasives?
If there was funding, yes. Unfortunately, cutting those interstates is expensive, and just they don't have the time or the funding to get it out and cut 4 times a year. That's something that I would love to explore. Like, I'm not a big pollinator guy, but I do care very much about pollinator and field conservation, and VC does have some fantastic invert people. So I'd love to get something like that going, where we do more native plantings when they're doing reseedings, or after work when they do a new bridge and they have to reseed, do native flowers. And that's something that we'd definitely be in favor of. It's just, that the whole funding issue is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Sarah is asking, do you meet with landowners across the border in New Hampshire? She's a New Hampshire Conservation Commissioner.
Yes, yeah, more than happy to.
There you
go. Unfortunately, in 2020, I didn't, because I couldn't cross that border. But now I'm more than happy to.
Mm-hmm. And another question: what are the thresholds for Forbes or Thicket species in grasslands before it affects the quality of the nesting habitat?
It's really hard to say because they can be really patchy. And so you may have one patch that is getting pretty thickety and another is more hay. I'd say like 80% hay, 20% Forb, maybe. But so much of grassland conservation is on a spectrum, where it's like you have your vegetation spectrum, you have your elevation spectrum, you have your openness spectrum. So it's definitely possible that a field could be really open, have good drainage, and just there's slightly more forbs than in other fields, but birds may still like it because the other factors can compensate. So I say there isn't one hard rule, but yeah, I'd say that 75% to 25% ratio might be where it's at.
So the follow-up question to that was, could you mow every 2 to 3 years to keep a field open, or would there be too much shrub?
You could, unless stuff started invading it, which would be the main concern. So you just want to try and be mindful and keep an eye on it. I would suggest making sure that you if you are going to mow, make sure you're raking and removing the duff. If you like leave the hay just on the ground, it causes the grass the following year to be really patchy and just not nearly as nice to like be able to make nests in. So I'd say every 2 to 3 years of haying is fine, but when you do that, you're gonna want to remove it.
Mm-hmm. Any suggestions for the best ways to work with airport and DPW to develop best mowing practices next to a runway?
That's tricky because some airports are really good about it and others aren't. For instance, Bennington, the Benton Airport, I think that's Morse State. They have a thriving meadowlark community. Other places, just for whatever reason, hay much more often. I think it has to do with the type of airplanes and stuff that are flown in. I think with gliders, if it's like a manual glider, that might have another regulation as well. I do know that I think that Southeastern Audubon coordinates surveys at Hartness Airport in Springfield. So I think that they have a communication with someone, maybe at Fish and Wildlife, maybe at VTrans. I'd give Southeast Vermont Audubon Society an email and see how they were doing it.
That's great. I suspect we're talking about the Lebanon Airport here. All right. Are there any more questions?
I have a couple that I got. Someone asked if the Grassland Ambassador Program is still active. Yep. Yeah, that's me coming out and checking out your land and trying to make inroads with local communities and farmers. So shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I'll move that back and put it on the screen. What about non-hay delayed mowing with rotary mowers where thatch is left in place? Yeah, leaving that thatch is really, you want to try and remove anything left at least every couple of years, or else the duff layer just gets too thick. Here it is. So this is it's a lot going on. This right here, as you go up, the leaf litter increases, which also as you go down, the fire frequency increases. Makes sense, right? If you have no leaf litter, you have fires burning it off. Here, we simulate that by haying. So if we were having more short-eared owls, Nelson sparrows, they might like that thicker duff layer. But with Bobolinks, Savannah sparrows, they don't like it quite as thick as other species, which is why we recommend removing it at least every couple of years. Awesome. Well, if anyone else has anything, please, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I'd love to get out and maybe visit you if you have some good land you'd like me to check out. Yeah, and thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Kevin. I just want to let everyone know this is the first Lunch and Learn in a series of 4. Our next Lunch and Learn is February 17th. It's about emerald ash borers in the Upper Valley. We have Forester Neil Lampson coming to talk about some of the experimental cutting that he's been doing on one of our properties in Pomfret. You can find the registration on our website. I'm going to put the link in the chat so that you can get in there and register for that. If you're interested, I'd love to see you all again next month. So thank you, Kevin, for being here. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.